I was so tired. Wait, actually, maybe I was procrastinating because I really didn't want to do the thing. How well do we know ourselves? Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, host of the Power Up podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas that upgrade and impact our everyday lives. And in this episode, our Wednesday night discussion group looks at the topic of how well do we know ourselves? Okay, so I want to start with quite a what you might think at first an easy question, but I'm curious to hear what you think. So anyone can weigh in with this. The question is, how well do we know ourselves? If I were to ask you, how well do you know yourself? What would you answer to that?
Too well.
Too well. It's interesting because my daughter's obviously, I've got a 14-year-old girl, she's in high school, and she's obviously doing some sort of thing that she's filling in. She says to me, what are my strengths and weaknesses? You know how you have to do that sometimes for an interview. She's like, I managed to find all my strengths, but what are my weaknesses? Which is always a harder question to answer when you're in an interview type of setting, right? You know what the answer is, like, I tend to work too hard. All right, so we have one answer for very well. Anyone else wants to weigh in? How well do we know ourselves? Anyone wants to agree or disagree?
I think you can know yourself, but sometimes things can surprise you when you're in a situation that's unknown to you, and then different emotions and feelings come out that you didn't know existed in you. So you might know yourself to a point, but there's always surprises that come out.
Yes. I think that's a very, very good point. That you know, sometimes we surprise ourselves, right? Or like sometimes someone can ask you a question, and give me just a second. Hello. Let me just let Deborah in. Like I had a situation where one of my kids asked me last week. Hi, Deborah. Nice to have you join us. And like the question floored me, and all of a sudden I was like, yeah. So there are times that we can you know be surprised at different things about ourselves. Does anyone want to say that? Does anyone want to argue and suggest that maybe we don't know ourselves that well? We have quite a strong opinion at one end of the table. You agree?
I would say sometimes that others know you better.
That's a bit of a controversial statement, don't you think?
People that are close to you sometimes know you better.
Like family, yeah.
Family, best friends, or
Knows you better than you know yourself?
sometimes you see them as an outsider rather than as
More
Right.
critical on yourself, whereas other people won't be.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Well,
you think,
depends.
I can't do that.
if somebody complimented you, you'd turn around and
Go,
disagree.
"Nah,
No,
not me." Yeah,
you'd never turn around and say, yeah, you're right, I am.
But sometimes, you know, that's a good point, because I think we're talking about like sometimes someone sees something in us that others may not see. And sometimes when they say it to us, it's like, oh, you know, like maybe they're right, right? So I think we are having, I'm going to venture that even the strong opinion that we do know ourselves very well is perhaps getting slightly convinced that we may not. We may not. What about when someone tells us something that we don't want to hear? Who's right? Are they right or are they wrong? It depends what they're telling you, right? It depends how badly you don't want to hear it, right?
Yeah.
If you really, really don't want to hear it, it probably is
And how
right.
someone tells you makes a difference.
No, you like, they don't want to hear it.
It makes a difference. It makes a difference if someone how they tell you as to whether you'll be open to listening or not. But it doesn't actually make a difference to whether it's true or not, right? Like if someone tells you something about yourself that you don't want to hear and they say it in a not nice way, it may still be true. You may not want to hear it, but it may still be true. So a couple of weeks ago, I saw a following statement on Instagram, which got me thinking. And it said successful people know the difference between tired and lazy. And that sort of really like struck me, because for I see for myself that that's something that sometimes comes up, right? Like I'm like not sure whether I'm tired or and I should just rest, or if I'm just like can't be bothered and I should just push through. Anyone can relate to feeling like that ever?
Yeah.
Like I'll give you an example. Like last week, I can't remember what day it was. I don't know, Wednesday, Thursday, I don't remember what day it was. And I was like so tired, and like Samuel turned around to me and said, like, what have you got on? And I was like, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got to do the other. And he's like, just come out for 2 hours. And we did. We went to Hollingworth Lake, we walked around the lake, we came back. It was like a 2-hour trip, but like it was the best thing, because what would have happened if I would have stayed home? I would have like tried to do work but been too tired, right? So, you know, like sometimes the best thing when you're feeling like I don't want to do something, sometimes if it's coming from tiredness, the best thing really is just rest, right? It doesn't all have to happen today, right? It'll wait for you for tomorrow. But if you're just not tackling it because you're lazy, then resting isn't actually going to help, right? So do you see sort of the distinction between? But what struck me more was this idea that the ability to know the difference of when is when, right? Like how well are you able to know the difference between, and for different people, it's different things, right? For me, it could be between being tired and feeling like I can't be bothered. For some people, it could be the difference between thinking things through properly and overthinking things, right? For some people, it's a difference between, you know, kindness and not respecting your boundaries. Do you get what I'm getting at? Is that there's so many situations in life where, you know, it could be one or two things. It could be a good thing to go and do that, or it could actually be a negative thing to do that. And it really is a question of knowing what you need to do in the moment. Is everyone with me so far? Yes? Okay, so now that I've sort of clarified the question, how well do you think, now pick your sort of like pressure point, right? Pick your one where you kind of like struggle to know the difference. How well do you think you know yourself in that sort of situation? Whether it's a question of overthinking things, whether it's a question of if she's guilty, then what we're told what happens is that she dies the most miserable death, right? The most horrible, miserable, humiliating death. Now you read the story and you think to yourself, hold on a second. Here's a woman, an intelligent woman, and she knows that she's got three options, right? She's got option A if she's not guilty, nothing to be afraid of, take the drink, nothing's gonna happen. You're gonna be shown to be completely innocent, and you go away. If you're guilty, you really got, you know, two choices. You either deny your guilt and you're going to have to die this horrible death, or admit your guilt. Right? Isn't it better? Because in Jewish law, if she admits her guilt and she says that she did have an affair, so her and husband have to get divorced, and she can't marry the guy that she had an affair with, but she can go on and rebuild her life, right? Like her life is not over. There's a way back. So you think about it and you read the story and you're like, she's guilty, right? Let's just say there's a woman that she's guilty. She knows she has two options. Deny your guilt and you'll die the most miserable death, or admit your guilt and you'll rebuild your life. Yes, it'll be uncomfortable, whatever, while you're doing it, but you'll rebuild it. Why on earth would a woman ever choose to lie? Let me ask you the question. Why on earth would a woman ever choose to lie? And anyone can answer on Zoom or on Instagram. Why on earth would someone choose to lie if they know the options, right? And I think there's quite a few of us that are able to say or feel like we don't always know ourselves, right? And we did. Hello, Julene. So nice to have you join. Sorry, Julene is a good friend from Vancouver. It's always nice to have people from across the world join us. So apologies about that. Okay, let's get back to where we are. So, and I think someone said this earlier, and I can't remember who, so my apologies, but we don't see ourselves objectively, right? We have a knowledge of ourselves, and we can continue to grow in that knowledge of ourselves, but we don't see ourselves objectively. And I think Adele said this, or Abby, I can't remember which one, who it was, that outsiders can see us from a sort of a different perspective. Why? Because they're seeing us as an outsider, right? They are much more objective about ourselves than they are, than we are. And that's why it's very, it can be very, very difficult to face the truth, right? We hide from the truth. And I'll give you a few crazy stories that really show this. So there's a story in the parasha, in the Torah, that hi Bev, I guess it's halftime now because she's joining us. Is it? So where are we up to? Right. So there's the Isha Saita, right? Who was what's the story of the Isha Saita? The Isha Saita is a woman whose husband suspected that she has had an affair. So what happens is that he accuses her of having an affair, and there's a procedure that she has to go through. So what she has to do is she goes to the Kohen, the priest, and he gives her Bev says it is halftime. Well, thank you for joining us during the halftime. What's the score? So where were we up to? Right, so the Isha Saita, she takes a drink, and so what she does is she goes to the priest and gives her two options. He says to her, basically, are you guilty of what your husband has accused you of? And she's got one of two options. She can either admit, if she's guilty, she could admit her guilt. If she is not guilty, then she says that she doesn't admit it. And in that case, if she denies having an affair, then the Kohen takes a cup of water, dissolves a paper with God's name written on it, and she drinks it. And now one of two things will happen to her. If she is not guilty, nothing will happen to her, and the husband knows that she's not guilty, and they're back together, and she's given blessings for having to undergo this ordeal. Shame, embarrassment. But do you hear what you're saying, right? And you guys said this, not me, that the fear of shame or guilt is so strong that a person would rather die a miserable death rather than admit the truth and go through it. That's what you said, right? Without saying it, but that's what you insinuated, right? So this is what it's telling us, is that a person would rather, go to the end, suffer a miserable death, know that they're going to suffer a miserable death, rather than admit the truth, right? And if you think back to a time, and maybe it's just me, when you've done something and you're called out on it, right? Or someone says something to you. Anyway, so I think you can experience that as well. When someone tells you something you don't want to hear, our initial reaction is we resist it, right? But let me tell you another couple of stories, like crazy stories from that we're told. There was when Joshua, when they came, yes, when a person doesn't have fear of heaven, that definitely contributes to it. But again, it seems like it's a natural reaction that we have, a natural resistance, that it's hard for us to admit the truth. Now, here's another crazy story. So when the Jews went into the land of Jericho, they destroyed the land, and they were told that they weren't allowed to rebuild it. And Joshua said that if anyone was to transgress this commandment and rebuild it, the words that he used was, he says, when they lay the foundations, they will bury their oldest child, and when they complete the building of Jericho, they will bury their youngest child. So what happened? There's a guy called Chiel, and he ignores Joshua. And what happens is he lays the foundations for Jericho, and his oldest child dies. And he rationalizes it away. The kid was sick, whatever it was. He continues building. He has 8 children, continues building, and one by one, the children die, right? Crazy, crazy. You see what you're doing. Joshua gave you this curse. He said this would happen. It's happening. Just stop, right? Just stop. No, he completes it and he buries his last child. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? Like, that's how hard it can be for a person to admit the truth, right? Like, he knew, everyone knew this is what's going to happen. If you do X, Y is going to happen. So he did X and Y happened, but it didn't make any impacts on him. He just kept on going because it's very, very, very hard for us to admit the truth. And perhaps this is the reason why we're told that there's a concept in Judaism which says avera gerera severa, that a sin, one transgression, one bad thing leads to another bad thing. And the flip side is true as well, that one good deed leads to another good deed. But perhaps this is the reason why, because when a person does something wrong, right? And think about any time you may have, I mean, I'm like throwing out something here that you may resist the truth, perhaps, that we are not all perfect. And that, you know, think about sometimes that you've done something wrong. So a person would rather continue to do something wrong rather than admit that they have done wrong and then change the action. So perhaps that is one of the reasons why Judaism teaches us that one bad thing leads to one negative thing leads to another negative thing. I'm going to share with you again one more story as well. So Shimshon was a prophet, right? And his parents Shimshon was the story, incredible story, but I'll just give you a little snapshot of his life. So his parents did not have children. They were married for many years. They didn't have children, and they obviously wanted to have a child, and they prayed, and eventually they had his mother met a prophet, Elijah, and he told Elijah told Shimshon's mother that you are going to have a child, and when you have that child has become a Nazir, which means a Nazarite, which means that he has to grow his hair and he cannot drink wine. Now, what's fascinating is when you read the text, this is in the prophets, it says that Elijah told her, you know, it is true that you are barren, right? It is true that you cannot have children, but a miracle is going to happen and you will have a child. And she goes back, and the text says this, and she goes back and she relates to her husband the conversation that she had with Elijah. But there's one omission. What's the omission? She tells the whole conversation, but she leaves out the bit where he says, you are barren. Why? Because they at that time, in their, obviously, you know, not being able to have children is an extremely stressful situation. And they had argued with each other whose fault it was. And now that Elijah had really said to Shimshon's mother, it's because of you, even though it's not her fault, right? It's, you know, it's a physical thing. She left that bit out, right? She left that bit out. And even though, you know, it wasn't her fault, and the remedy's there, right? Elijah said, you're going to have the child. Like, what does it bother you? But all these, I think what all these stories are trying to tell us show us is that we have this deep instinctive desire to protect ourselves, right? To not face the truth. It's very, very difficult to actually face the truth, right? When the truth is not something that we want to hear. And it's interesting what Sharon sometimes said at the beginning was that even sometimes when someone gives you a compliment, we can resist it, right? So even for the good, it's sometimes hard for us to admit the truth. Sorry? To accept, and perhaps I think it's Abby was hinting at it. Perhaps it's because we recognize that when we recognize that that is our strength, or that is our compliment, or whatever it is, that is a responsibility, right? So sometimes it's easier not to face that sort of truth and just say, I can't, or whatever, as opposed to saying, maybe they're right, maybe I can step up to do whatever it is. So. Was that my child? Possibly. Anyway. Anyway. Going to bed. Oh, yes. Yes, we can talk about that another time. Bedtime. Anyway, where were we up to? So now that we've kind of established how difficult it is for us to know the truth. Is everything lost? What now, right? So I think I built up a pretty good case for saying that it's hard. It is hard for us to admit the truth. What now? What can we do sort of to address that? Is it all lost? Work on ourselves. So I think you're 100% right. And I think one of the ways of, how? Work on ourselves how? Before I say things, let's throw this out to the group. How can we work on ourselves? In what particular area? What particular? Yes. Number one is to be conscious of the fact that we can be wrong, right? And it's human nature to be wrong, and also to be. I think when someone says something to us that we can't, like, we don't want to hear or whatever, to be curious, right? To instead of just, once we've passed that initial resistance, which I think is very normal, is to have a curiosity and to see maybe. And what's fascinating is that we're told that someone who messes up and is embarrassed of it, right? It regrets it, right? The Torah says this incredible thing. Wait for it. It says all that person's sins are forgiven, right? So if you think about it, it's the hardest thing to do. I don't know if it's the hardest thing, but it's an extremely hard thing to do, to admit that we're wrong. But when a person is able to do that, when we're able to sort of be curious and say, maybe I was wrong, or yes, I was wrong. And you don't have to announce it out loud, but you say internally, it's between you and God. A person's sins are forgiven. And we're told that Achan was Achan, again, this was in the prophets, that when they were having a war, so they were told they weren't allowed to take any of the enemy's possessions, and Achan he took the possessions from the enemy, and the Jews, as a result of it, suffered with the war, right? They were losing the war because of it, and they realized, the leader at the time realized, that it must have been that someone took possession that they shouldn't have, and he asked who did, like, what was it, who did it? And Achan owned up, and this is what happened. He confessed his sins, and as a result of it, he composed a prayer which we still say in our prayers today, which is Al Kein Kavalacha, which a prayer that requests that God's presence is known in the entire world, right? So what do we see from Achan is that he messed up, right? He did something that caused the rest of the Jewish people to suffer. But because he had the strength of character to face the truth and say, you know what, I did wrong, he went from someone who caused tremendous harm to someone whose heart was in the right place. What is he praying for? He's praying for goodness and godliness to be revealed in this world. So it shows us that, yes, it's extremely hard. And I think I think Adele was saying this again. Apologies if it wasn't you, but was saying that when we recognize that it's an extremely hard thing, and when we choose to work on ourselves by remembering that it's a hard thing and staying curious when people says things and realizing that we're not perfect, then it takes us to a place where we get our mistakes, our sins forgiven, and we're able to bring a tremendous source, a tremendous amount of goodness and godliness into this world. Thank you for your time. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your feedback. You can get in touch with me. You can find me on Instagram at Gilaros. Please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Have a wonderful day.